Welcome to Simsbury Happenings. I'm Eric Wellman. We are looking ahead to the election today, but don't worry, we're not going to be talking about the two deeply unpopular candidates at the top of the ticket. I'm joined today by John Hampton, who is running for re-election to the State House representing the town of Simsbury. John, thanks so much for
Thank you, sir.
being
it's great
here.
to be here. Thanks
Absolutely.
so much for inviting me to be on the show.
Sure. So this would be your third term. Why are you
Correct.
running for a third term?
Well, I love public service, and ever since I was a kid, my mother found me at age 7 or 8 watching Watergate hearings and Vietnam War coverage, and she knew from that point, I was one of 7, that I was going to be an unusual child. And I discovered a fascination with government and how our system worked. Ever since then, knew I wanted to be in government in some form. So I started out working on local, state, and national campaigns and decided that I wanted to run for myself. And I ran for state representative in 1998 and lost. But I stayed involved. I served on the Aging and Disability Commission, the Zoning Board of Appeals, and then the Board of Selectmen slot opened up, and I ran for that in 2003.
Yeah, and you spent 9 years on the Board of Selectmen.
9 years on the Board of Selectmen, 5 years as Deputy First Selectman. And then Linda Schofield, then State Rep, decided not to run again. And I thought it was a great time to run for that seat, and I was ready for that opportunity. And that was my first term, and it's been the thrill of a lifetime and an honor to serve my hometown in the state legislature.
So Simsbury is a bit unique in that respect because it is an entire town that is also the 16th district.
Yes, there's 151 seats in the legislature, and there's only 2 of us that represent one town and one town in its entirety. Most districts are 2, 4, 7 towns to cover. Basically, each district adds up to about 23,000 people, and Simsbury happens to be that exact number. Probably 80 years ago plus, we had Simsbury and Granby, I think was the district. But for me, it's just Simsbury, of course, which is my hometown.
Good. So I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the issues
Sure.
that are going to be important in 2017 and beyond. And the first one that comes to my mind is the school funding issue.
Sure.
Very recently, earlier in September, a Connecticut judge had basically a scathing ruling on the way that Connecticut currently funds its schools. My first question was, what does this mean for Simsbury? But before I get to that, what does this mean for the state lawmakers who have to grapple with this issue? What are the questions ahead?
Well, there's lots of questions, and it was a major decision, and the judge, as most folks know, gave us 180 days to basically come up with a new way of funding our schools, basically eliminating the ECS formula, which has become antiquated, and over time, many folks have tried to fix that formula to make it more equitable, and he threw that out. It's now being appealed, but basically it starts the discussion over again on how we fairly fund our schools. And of course, Simsbury being a wonderful school system, we want to protect our schools and our precious funding for our schools, which is limited as it is, and take care of our teachers, make sure our teachers have the right tools and resources they need. But we also need to be mindful of our other districts. You know, we want to raise the bar and raise all our students' educational experience and make sure everyone in Connecticut gets the best education possible, because that means good education, higher education, good paying jobs, and it makes a great, vibrant state.
Yeah. So what role do you see yourself playing in that conversation as you're balancing the needs of your district, which has one of the highest performing schools in the state, with the very real needs that struggling schools, face throughout Connecticut?
Well, first and foremost, we're just going to have a dialogue which will involve people from districts like Simsbury to districts like New Britain, and share perspectives and share history and try and strategically put together a formula that's fair and balanced and still fund Simsbury the way it needs to be funded.
John, how would you describe your politics?
My politics?
Your politics. And what I mean by that is you are, I think, a unique Democrat.
I would consider myself a moderate Democrat. In fact, I'm a leader of the moderate caucus, and there's about 35 of us, moderate Democratic legislators. So I consider myself pretty fiscally responsible and very concerned about how the state spends money and bonds money, and I'm concerned about the way our state has evolved over the last 20, 25 years, that we've been dismissive of businesses, created a climate that's not conducive to businesses, and we've created a climate that's not conducive to young people to come here to get a job, middle-aged people to stay here and afford it, and retired people to be able to retire here. So I think we have an opportunity as Democrats and Republicans working across the aisle to focus on our priorities, fund our core services without breaking the financial backs of our residents and overtaxing our residents. You know, I voted against the last two budgets because they included tax increases, which I did, two historic tax increases, which I could not support, because I really believe we need to look at structural reforms in our government, long-term fixes, pension reform, capping our spending, capping our bonding. But I consider myself, you know, I always tell people that I took an oath to the Constitution first, and I didn't take an oath to my party. I love being a Democrat, but I'm more concerned about, at the end of the day, answering the concerns of my constituency and my own value system, set of value systems, and doing what is right, doing what is best for Simsbury. So that's my style of politics, very open, very transparent, and try not to be hyper-partisan, because I think people are turned off by that and looking for more consensus. And I've built relationships on both sides of the aisle, friendships, and the best advice I got coming into the legislature was from a former representative who says, "John, every day I want you to go to the other side of the chamber and introduce yourself to a Republican." And I did that, and I've done that, and I've created great friendships, but I've also been able to get legislation done because I've built these relationships and built common ground.
Give me an example where that has helped you get stuff done.
When I first got elected, they tell you as a freshman legislator to find a signature initiative. And because you get overwhelmed by so many different issues, they said find a significant signature issue. And one fell into my lap when I discovered that UConn was trying to divert water from the Farmington River. And I said, well, wait a minute, that doesn't sound environmentally sound or fiscally prudent. I said, well, what does our statewide water plan say about that? And people shrugged their shoulders and said, we don't have a statewide water plan. And I said, okay, I have my signature issue. So I set up about, as a freshman, creating language to draft a bill that would call for a statewide water plan by 2018. I pulled together a water summit of every person involved with water, CBIA, environmental groups, academia, water utilities, municipalities. If water's involved, agriculture, water's involved in everything. We got all the stakeholders to the table to come up with consensus about how to manage our water. Because, as you know, looking at Flint and other parts of the state, or other parts of the country, water is so vital.
Yeah.
So when you're in the legislature, it's different than being on the Board of Selectmen. When you're on the Board of Selectmen, you were one of 6, so you talk to 5 people about your idea. When you're a freshman legislator, you're low on the totem pole. There's 150 other reps. There's 36 senators. And by the way, there's a governor that you need to convince and go around and push your bill. And it has to go through all the committees of cognizance. And you have to compromise with people who might want to tweak your bill. And so ultimately I was able to work both sides of the aisle, many committees, many meetings, many stakeholders to get that law passed. And it was passed about 10 before midnight. And I give credit to State Senator Kevin Whitkos, the other side of the aisle, he was able to get it over the finish line in the Senate. So that was a way I worked with the other side of the aisle to compromise and get that done. So it's all about relationships and how you're working with people, and at the end of the day, doing your best job for your constituents.
You have, on some prominent occasions this year, departed ways with your Democratic colleagues, including Governor Malloy. I'm thinking about the budget that was passed. That's a budget that you voted against because you said that it didn't do enough to address those structural reforms. What do you mean by that? What does that look like?
Well, basically, I mean, let's look at our bonding, for example. If you look at it, the allocation of bonding the last go-around, there was probably, just hundreds and hundreds of thousands of projects. So you look at maybe number one on the list, and it's $500,000 for a bridge. And you look at it and go, okay, well, that's good. That's infrastructure. That's really important. We don't want bridges falling down. But second on the list might be the Folk Art Museum of Stonington for $500,000. Now, I love folk art, and I'm sure most people appreciate art. But when the economy is where it is now, you have to prioritize and maybe get private funding for that. Or maybe we don't fund a baseball field this year as opposed to funding a bridge. It's like you in your own household. Before you go to Disney World or put in a pool, you got to probably fix your roof, right?
Ideally, yeah.
Ideally. Right. So that's the attitude I think the state should have, is taking care of its infrastructure before we go on some of these other projects, which are worthwhile. But as we struggle to pay down our debt, we need to be more prudent. We also need to look at pension reform. Certainly, our state workers are very valuable, but I think moving forward with new employees, we need to look at how we move toward defined benefits, because we have a huge unfunded liability on pensions, and pensions are really hurting a lot of states, including Connecticut. So that's a reform I'd like to see, and capping our spending, and really getting a handle on our spending, so those are some examples.
I feel like the elephant in the room with all these discussions is the idea of regionalism. Mm-hmm. Communities working together, pooling resources, ideally to save money and be more efficient. What role does regionalism play? Does it have to play a role?
Well, it's certainly important. I mean, we're such a Yankee state, and we're so used to our 169 fiefdoms that towns are really reluctant to give up. But I give kudos to former First Selectman Mary Glassman, who was a real leader in regionalism, starting in Simsbury, looking how we share technology and equipment with other towns. You know, does Avon, Simsbury, and Grebbe need their own dog pound, or can we share one? Can we share highway equipment? And at the state level, we're looking at sharing, network, internet, and maybe sharing Board of Ed services, things like that. So there's so many redundancies across towns, and we're all working in our own little fiefdoms, that there is a lot of benefit to sharing. There's one initiative. The Speaker of the House is big on regionalism. One thing that's come up is 911. We each have our own town 911 system.
That's right.
Now, Texas has 4 or 5 911 systems, as opposed to Connecticut.
4 or 5 probably right here in the valley.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But, I don't know. I kind of go back and forth on that, because a lot of people living in Simsbury count on their local police and the personal attention and the risk maybe of losing that kind of important coverage in case an emergency happens. But, the proof is in the pudding. It certainly seems to work in states like California and Texas and saves a lot of money.
So what role does the state have to offer municipalities either a carrot or a stick to say, this is the direction we want you to go? Well,
there is, the incentives of tax breaks and just cost savings for regional initiatives. And I'm on the Moore Commission, which is there's different subcommittees which studies different municipal efficiencies across education, across technology, across all sorts of different areas. So the legislature has been addressing it over the last few years, and there seems to be a lot of potential in saving towns money.
So, John, you're one of the leaders of the Commission on Children. Am I pronouncing
Vice
that
Chairman
right?
of the Committee
Yeah.
on Children.
Okay, Vice Chairman of the Committee on Children. Tell me why that work is so meaningful to you.
I've always loved children. I came from a family of 7. I have 20 nieces and nephews, and I work extremely well with children, and this committee deals with some really grappling, compelling issues, such as mental health. Children's Committee deals with everything other than education. So we came up with the mental health reforms post Sandy Hook. Mm-hmm. We deal with concussions in athletics, preventing concussions and educating folks about concussions. Toxic chemicals of concern and toys for children. How we get pesticides out of playing fields and municipal fields. GMOs in baby foods, GMO labeling and for baby foods, and anything related to children other than education. Mm-hmm. So we've made a lot of dramatic improvements to the lives of our children. We also have cognizance over DCF, so we deal with a lot of DCF issues. So I'm proud to be vice chairman of that committee.
Good. So, John, you've been knocking on a lot of doors this election season.
Yes, my shoe leather is showing. I gotta hide my shoes.
Hold it up there, proudly.
Yes, like Adelaide Stevenson.
What are voters telling you is on their minds this election year?
The economy. How they can stay and live comfortably in Simsbury, whether you're a young couple starting out, whether you're middle-aged, whether you're retired. People are concerned about being able to live in Connecticut and thrive in Connecticut. And the same thing for businesses. People are anxious, and how the government spends their money and how we need to kind of get back to the basics. And people are concerned about, of course, the schools, protecting our schools. Older folks, there's going to be a elder explosion the next 10, 15, 20 years, so we have to be prepared for older Americans in terms of their health care and transportation and jobs. So people talk about that. Sometimes people ask me about the big why and why it hasn't. Sometimes people think I'm still a selectman, and they'll ask me selectman questions, and I can ask them that, answer those questions, or pass them on to the first selectman. Or sometimes they ask me about immigration, and I pass them on to our federal folks. But going door to door is the best way. I've gone to thousands and thousands of doors and meeting people at their doors. And people say, well, why do you come to my door? And I'm like, well, I work for you. And you wouldn't hire somebody until you interviewed them, right? And they're like, oh, yeah. So I said, ask me questions and tell me what you're thinking about. And sometimes people go on for 20, 30 minutes. Sometimes people grab my material and move on. But it's fascinating and a great way to connect with my constituents, and I'm always very cognizant of that. I hold regular office hours and stay very connected to my constituents.
How do you approach the question? If you're talking to someone who's, say, retired on a fixed income, Simsbury has, among the higher taxes in the state. What do you tell that person who just, can't afford to live here, but wants to?
Well, the good news is that when I was a selectman, we did initiate a tax relief program under my leadership. So there is a senior tax relief program, which folks should go to the town website to learn more about. But I also reassure them that I'm working hard at the Capitol, that I am keeping an eye on the state's finances in terms of our spending and how we spend our money, and so that they're not negatively impacted tax-wise. Certainly, they're living on fixed incomes. We have to be able to work toward initiatives to keep people living in their homes longer, because it's more cost-effective and better quality of life. And I'm on the aging committee, so we've worked on things like elder abuse initiatives. It's very rampant now, sadly, with seniors. The good news is seniors, folks are living longer. The bad news is I don't think we're necessarily prepared for the tsunami of elderly. I hear from older Americans who are looking for jobs in their mid-50s to mid-60s. They don't want to retire. They're competing for jobs with younger folks and middle-aged folks. And, they want us to work harder for affordable housing. That's a big concern in Simsbury. Transportation. So I try and address those needs as well.
Yeah, speaking of transportation, what are you hearing from bike advocates?
Bike advocates seem to be quite happy. The governor's major initiative is a transportation, of course, and bike trails are included in that. And Simsbury has been a leader in being bike friendly, and I was very supportive of that initiative as a selectman and as a state representative. The bad news is I'm hearing more and more kind of we're having to deal with maybe just an overabundance of bikes and pedestrians, that we have to be more conscious of safety.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of accidents, things like that, and maintaining our trails and making sure that it's open and accessible to everyone, and that we connect the trails. We're trying to connect Simsbury to Terriffill, and then Terriffill on into Hartford. That's a major initiative we'd like to see, so people can commute into Hartford safely.
We've been talking about what you're hearing from voters. On the way of the economy, is the issue, how do we bring more jobs, better paying jobs to Connecticut? Is that the issue?
Yes, and sometimes people say, well, what are you going to do legislatively to bring, to help businesses?
Yeah.
And sometimes I say, I'm not going to do anything but get out of their way. A lot of times the worst thing you can do is over-legislate. And businesses I meet with all the time, Antonio's is a local multi-generational family business, and he'll sit down with me and tell me all the burdens that he has as a small business owner. And I meet with Simsbury Bank and what they have to deal with. And my father was a doctor, so I know the Hippocratic Oath is do no harm. So as a legislator, you start out with that attitude, do no harm, in terms of sometimes as legislators you go in and you think we know everything. Well, we don't know everything. We represent 23,000 people. We come in with our own perspective and mindset, but we need to listen to those we serve, and businesses are critical in that. And it's one reason I voted against the minimum wage, because I think we continue to, until these businesses get an equilibrium, I don't think we can add more and more burdens to them. So sometimes we just have to get out of the way of businesses. I was one of two Democrats who's been endorsed by the CBIA, Connecticut Business and Industry Association. Very proud of that, because I'm pro-business and pro-economy and pro-revitalizing our economy. I think we're all about that, is revitalizing our economy.
I'd like to highlight a few other of your endorsements. CEA, the Teachers Union.
Yeah, Connecticut Education Association, really proud of that. So supportive of our teachers, especially in Simsbury. We have the best and the brightest. And of course I went through Terriffill School, and I always like to say Terriffill School produced the best and the brightest, but it's a great school. All of our schools are great, and I'm really proud to receive that endorsement. I was also endorsed by the Connecticut League of Conservation Voters for my environmental stewardship, and the Connecticut Realtors just endorsed me as well. So I'm really proud of that. But the biggest endorsement comes from the citizens of Simsbury, and that's what I'm asking folks for, is their vote on November 8th to continue to serve them, because it's such an honor and we have so much more work to do.
You seem to be putting together a coalition that I think many people running for public office would be very envious of. I guess I'd say congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. It's just a unique pleasure and an opportunity. And one night I was sitting at the House chamber, which is glorious and beautiful, and it was like 2 a.m., and the legislator next to me said, I can't believe we have to be here till 2 a.m. And I just looked at him and I said, I can't believe we get to be here, period. I mean, it's just an honor. It gives you goosebumps to be able to be in that chamber, that historic chamber, and to be able to make a difference for the town you love.
So I know you're working hard. You're going to be working hard over between now and November 8th, meeting as many folks as you can. I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you so much.
November 8th.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on your show, and thank you to the residents of Simsbury for giving me the opportunity to serve them as their state representative, and humbly ask for their support in November.
And you're watching Simsbury Happenings. I'm Eric Wellman. We'll be back next month with another discussion of what's going on around town. Thanks so much for being here with us today.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.